So as Patricia has said, we need a way to make sure that our organization is ready for a crisis, and that's going to be through a combination of training and exercises. But the question then is, how do you make sure the training and exercises are actually going to get you ready and get you prepared and close any gaps that you have? And that's where this idea of the readiness roadmap is going to come in. So we have two kinds of readiness. We have general organizational readiness and scenario-specific preparation. General organizational readiness you can think of as general fitness. This is your crisis fitness. Whereas scenario-specific preparation is a little bit more like sport-specific skills training. Now we're going to focus on creating a roadmap for general organizational readiness or crisis fitness today, for the simple fact that we've got people from different countries, different industries, different sectors, all of whom will face different challenges. The challenges that a bank faces are very different to the challenges that a pharmaceutical company faces. And so if we were to talk about specific scenarios right now, it wouldn't be relevant to several of you. But creating this general organizational readiness is relevant to everyone, and then what you do is you use your risk assessment to determine which scenarios you should be preparing for. So we're going to be focused on general organizational readiness, and that's what the roadmap is going to help you work out. So what we need first of all is a way to assess our readiness. And this is similar to any other kind of audit or assessment, and we start with a standard. There are several out there. BS 11200 is one. I'm going to show you a model that we use. But essentially you're saying, what does good look like and how do we compare to that? And so you then grade it, and I suggest use something nice and simple like a red, amber, green, a traffic light type system, and then you can say, okay, it's a red, there's nothing in place, we're close to the standard, in which case it's an amber, or we meet the requirement, in which case it's green. And that gives you a very simple but very clear way to say, okay, where do we have gaps, where do we meet the standards, and where might we have a little bit of work to do. So we're starting with the standard, this idea of what good looks like, and then we compare our organization to that. So as a simple example, here's a definition of situation awareness. It's a definition that we use in one of our models. You can see the definition there, and then when you think about your organization, you can then say, okay, how do we measure up to that? And so, for example, you may come away with a simple set of observations like this, and from that you can then pull out a couple of things. So we have a basic system in place, so that the basic requirement is there, but there are a few flaws in how we share information, and the system is slow. So again, going back to a red, amber, green type of grading, I would say that that's a green. It's pretty close to the requirement, and in a moment we'll talk about how you have the corrective actions that can get you there. So you start with the requirement, think about how you measure up, and then give yourselves a rating. And those ratings then go on to explain the kind of corrective actions you need. So in addition to having the specific corrective actions, you can think about these broadly in one of three different ways. Where there's nothing in place, you're going to have to go and build something. When you're close to the requirement, you can probably sharpen what's in place and close that small gap that's remaining. But if it's already at that level, don't think there's nothing to do, because you still need to sustain what's in place and make sure that it remains fit for purpose. Remember, people change, leadership members swap out, you may have a change in your operational environment, there may be a new regulation comes in. The point is, what works today or what worked 6 months ago might not work for the future. So the idea of the sustaining pathway is to make sure that what you have in place that's currently good stays good for the future. But the point is, you can then have an idea of the gradings correspond to these levels of corrective action, and it gives you a quick way to think about how big a lift is it. Obviously, building something from scratch where there's nothing in place, that can be quite a lot of work, and you maybe want to prioritize that and put more resources into it, whereas you know sustaining it might be less work. So again, right away you get a sense of how much effort's required to close those gaps. Then, of course, for each of the gaps that you have, you would come up with a specific corrective action. And this goes back to then thinking about how do we make sure our training is focused and specific. This is what we mean. We're focused specifically on the things that you need to correct. So where there are gaps, where there are things that aren't in place, where things need to be improved, you now have a way to say, okay, our training has to close these gaps. It's very specific and targeted to get us to this place of readiness. We're no longer just going to do some training and hoping we get better. We're doing training with some very clear objectives. We're making improvements with very clear objectives to ensure that we have this organizational readiness that we're looking for. So what we've done is we've put all of this into a workbook. Now, if you've done audits, if you've done these kind of corrective programs before, a lot of this will be very straightforward, but hopefully this will save you time from having to go to look for a standard. It will save you time for thinking about how to put all of this together. So if nothing else, this hour that you're spending in this session is going to give you many hours back, I hope, if the workbook does what it's supposed to do. So it is this step-by-step guide. You may have downloaded it already. It's available on the GSX platform, and we've also set up a little site at my company, kith.co/ASIS, where you can go and get this workbook and some other tools if you can't get it elsewhere. But this is going to walk you through the process. And so what we're basing this on is, as I said, there are other standards. We use this three-component model. We've had the benefit and the good fortune to work with a lot of organizations in the US and around the world in some of their toughest days, and we've seen what good looks like. We've seen the elements or the behaviors that really good organizations exhibit, and then we've seen organizations where there's a deficit in these and how that results. And so where we see organizations that are fast, they have speed, they're clear about what they're doing, they have a high level of mutual trust, they generally do well. Organizations that are a little bit slower, a little bit unsure about who they are, what they're trying to say, what they're trying to do, and when the team doesn't gel together, they're going to struggle in a crisis. And so what we did is we came up with these three criteria, and underneath each of those there are actually 5 sub-elements. So there are 15 elements we look at for crisis readiness, and that's what's in the workbook. But if you have another standard, if there's an industry standard, if you want to use BS 11200, you can use those criteria instead and then just follow the same process. But the point is, you begin with this idea of what does good look like, and then that's where we work through from there. So whichever standard you're using, the first thing, obviously familiarize yourself with the elements, understand what does that mean, what is the standard, what does good look like. And then you go on to evaluate yourself. So starting with the elements and the definitions, then exactly as we did before, think about how do we measure up to that, where might there be gaps, and then give yourselves a rating using the red, amber, green color coding. And then I've also added a little score here, which we'll come on to later on when we come to prioritization. And it's as simple as that. Now, this might feel like a lot of work. You can spend long periods of time assessing organizations, but equally you'll get a lot out of spending 2 or 3 hours just thinking about your organization, your company, and when you think about them and look at the criteria, you'll very quickly be able to grade yourself and come up with a pretty accurate assessment, at least as a start point of knowing where you need to put some effort in. So we start with the criteria, move on to the evaluation and gradings. And then we can start to think about the corrective actions and also what support is required, because importantly, you're not going to be doing this by yourself. You need leadership support, you may need additional budget, you may need expertise to help. So start to think about who do I need or what do I need to help bring this corrective action around. So if you've figured out that you need to, say, improve your chain of command, you'll probably be working with HR. So again, now start to think about what's required to put that corrective action in place, because then the next stage is you think about, well, how difficult will that be? And then a combination of your difficulty and the assessment value helps you prioritize. And this is explained in the workbook, but the point now is you can start to say, okay, this is something that's going to have a big impact, it's relatively easy to do, that ends up being a higher priority. Something with less impact that's a bit more complicated to put together, we'll give that a lower priority. So the idea is we're sort of prioritizing things with most impact that are relatively easy to do, and that's going to help us in a moment when we build the timeline. And then the final thing we add here is an estimate. Like, how long do we think it'll take? If it's changing a procedure, that could be relatively quick. If it's doing a sort of organization-wide drill, that's going to take a long time to plan and put together. So you can start to do some time estimates, which are going to help you when you build it all into a plan. And then you just simply, here's an example of one, you just simply fill this out. And again, this can be done relatively quickly. I've been able to do these in the matter of 3 or 4 hours for organizations I know quite well. Whereas if I'm working as a contractor, it might take me a week or two to really get to know my way around the organization. If it's for your organization, you should be able to put this together in a matter of hours and come out with a roadmap at the end. So don't overthink it. You can always go back in and add more information later, and you can sort of layer this as you go through. But it can be as simple as just filling out the tables in the workbook. And then at the end, you put it all into a sequence. So now the prioritization numbers, you start lowest number through highest number, add on the amount of time that's required, and you can come up with a little timeline like this. And that's what the workbook is going to help you get to and go through to get you this roadmap at the end. So you now have, where are we now? Where should we be? What actions do we need to take to get there? And then we've put those into a sequence, of a prioritized sequence, and then we've worked out the timeline for that. And on top of all of that, we've also thought about the support and resources that we might need to make that work. And that's your roadmap. That's a thing you can take to your leadership. The benefits now, the results of this, that we have this roadmap to organizational readiness, but it's needs-based. So I'm sure you've all had this time when you've gone into some training, and it's maybe been fantastic training, you maybe really enjoyed the training, you've been through a simulation or a drill or something, and it's been a lot of fun. But at the end of it, if somebody said, how much better are we now than we were 2 or 3 hours ago? It's hard to really give a value to that. You would guess that you're slightly better, but if you've got no clear objectives, you've got no measurable criteria, there's no way to really know. However, now we've got a needs-based program and we've got measurable progress, because remember, each piece of training, the drills, the exercises, are all designed to meet these gaps, to help with these corrective actions. So now we've got a way to say it's needs-based, this is what we have to do because here are the gaps. We can measure our progress and we can justify our investments. And that's going to help, one, make your organization better, but importantly, this measurable progress and the way that you can justify it is going to be extremely useful when it comes to getting your leadership to buy into this, which is what Patricia is going to talk about next. So I appreciate everyone being patient that we've had to do this remotely. I hope that the workbook works for you, and you can download it, as I said, and please reach out to us if you have any questions. But with that, I'm going to hand over to Patricia, who's now going to get to the most complex part of this, arguably, which is how do I get my leadership to buy into this and support this and really champion this program so we can actually become ready for crisis.